for the next session in this hall, Parson. And I believe most of the people are already here. So warm welcome. A very good morning to all the doctors.
So good morning to all of you. I think to be in time is very, very important. And so I think we can have this. I think we have got, we are right on time. It's 9:30 now. I think we shall not be wasting any time. So in this free paper session on optics, refraction and contact lens, welcome and good morning to all my co-chairpersons. Most of them are very, very senior people in our fraternity. So good morning and welcome to all of you.
Doctor,
and
with
also
your permission, may I also take all the names of our doctor, that is the co-judges.
So
Welcome to
myself, Chairman Dr. Sahasranamam, co-chairpersons are Dr. Nita Joshi and Dr. Rahul Deshpande. Convener is Dr. Rajshekhar K. The co-conveners are Sumit Monga and Sunaina Malik Madam, and the moderators are Prabulla Kumar Maharana and Dr. Krishna Prasad R. So these are the co-panelists. So welcome, and I think most of them are present. So we will go on to the session, and welcome and good morning to all those who are presenting in this session. So, so the first speaker is Dr. Venkata Prabhakar on anti-dysphotopsia lens. So, Dr. Venkata Prabhakar, are you here? Dr. Venkata Prabhakar Guduru, are you there?
Dr. Venkat.
So he is not responding. He will be there.
You can take the next.
So we will take the next one, and the next presenting author is Dr. Ashwini Chandramouli. Ashwini, are you here?
Dr. Ashwini.
The speakers seem to be present.
She may have a problem with connectivity, is it?
Yeah, because we can see Dr. Venkat is also here.
So probably connectivity issues.
Yes, something wrong with the connection with them.
I think they can be given a minute or so, sir. They'll just
Okay,
need to like
Okay,
set their thing.
okay, to get in, no? To get in.
Yeah.
Dr. Ashwini is also around.
So whoever comes in first, we can get them
We
in.
can allow. We can
Ashwini or Venkat.
I think Dr. Venkat is there, sir.
Yes, sir. I'm there. I'm there.
Please speak.
Yes. Okay,
allow. Please
Venkat.
start. Doctor.
Yes.
Please
I
start.
think we can start.
Can I start? Okay.
Ah,
Yeah,
yes,
I'll
start.
starting.
Let us speak.
Good morning, everyone. My presentation is on anti-dysphotopsia intraocular lens. A
Sorry,
novel
sir.
design.
Sorry, sir. Please share your screen first.
Oh yeah, one second, please. Is it seen, sir?
Yeah. Make it slideshow. Make it like full screen.
Yes.
Perfect. Go ahead.
Now you can start. Yeah.
Good morning, everyone. My presentation is on anti-dysphotopsia intraocular lens, a novel design to prevent negative dysphotopsia. It has been 2000 years since the first ever cataract surgery was performed. Since then, there has been a lot of evolution, but there are few factors which prevents the cataract surgery to reach its zenith, that is negative dysphotopsia, which is perceived as a temporal crescentric shadow seen in 15.5% of the patients post-cataract surgery. This is commonly encountered problem in OPD, even after giving best possible surgical outcomes as a surgeon, where the patient says, "Sir, I can see everything. I don't have any pain, but I see this crescentric shadow on the temporal side, and this is bothering me." And as a surgeon, we don't have a solution for this, and we wanted to find one. Coming to the negative dysphotopsia optics, and why does it happen? The most accepted theory, it is a gray shaded area bordered. This is a gray shaded area and bordered by the line passing in between the iris and the ocular lens, intraocular lens, and the line that is refracted at the optic edge. And these are two culprits which causes negative dysphotopsia. Here we can see in the OCT that there is a lot of gap between the iris and the intraocular lens through which the light passes. And this is a normal crystalline lens where we don't see any gap here. So if you want to get rid of negative dysphotopsia, we have to get rid of this space between the iris and the intraocular lens. Based on the same concept, these are the other two intraocular lenses that are available, but they are very complicated to implant as it requires posterior capsular rhexis and all. And our idea was to develop a new IOL design, simple in its concept and easy to implant. Our idea was, as the lens is implanted, the optic by default should come at the capsular rhexis margin, thus eliminating the gap between iris and the optic. So there is no space for the light to pass. And this was our lens design. This is our lens where we can see a central 6 mm optic and a 360 degrees haptic, which is angulated as seen in this particular picture, and it comes with 2 dialing holes. This is the video showing the implantation. Here we can see the lens is loaded into the cartridge just like any other intraocular lens. In post-phacoemulsification eye, we can see the lens being injected into the capsular bag. Being made up of 20% hydrophilic water content material, it is very capsule friendly and easily manipulated. And it comes with 2 dialing holes with the help of which the lens is manipulated inside the capsular bag. And the same is used to aspirate the visco behind it. Here we can see all it takes is a simple nudge and the lens centers itself into the capsular bag. As we can see here, and the optic comes right below the capsular rhexis margin, you can see here. And the visco is aspirated through the dialing holes. And these are the slit lamp images post-cataract surgery. Here we can see a small reflection which highlights the fact that there is no gap between the iris and the optic. And this is another picture in the dilated eye where we can see a 360 degrees depression around the optic which continues as the haptic. So the both reasons which cause negative dysphotopsia are dealt here. And this is another interesting picture where the intraocular lens looks like just like a crystalline lens except for these dialing holes. This is the OCT undilated picture where we can see the optic here, and here we can highlight that there is no gap between the iris and the optic, thus eliminating the gap. And this is a dilated picture where we can see the optic profile, and these hyperreflective things are the capsular rhexis margins. And the thing is, the optic continues as a haptic, and there is no optic edge here for the refraction of the light. This is another interesting picture in dilated eye where the angles are wide open, and this lens does not cause any angle closure. This is a Scheimpflug image where we can see the optic here, and there is no gap between the iris and the optic. And the interesting part, this lens keeps the posterior capsule wide open, and this gives the normal crystalline lens profile as we can see in this picture, thus eliminating all kinds of dysphotopsias. Coming to the study and analysis, 56 patients who experience a negative dysphotopsia in one eye already are taken into this study, and who are willing for other eye are included. The average age group was 53 to 71 years, and NS2 to 3 grade cataracts were included, and they were followed up for 2 years. Our anti-dysphotopsia lens is implanted in 56 patients so far, and all the patients are deployed free of negative dysphotopsias, and there were no adverse events intraoperative or postoperative. This is the graph showing the significance of our lens, where none of the patients had any symptoms of negative dysphotopsia. To conclude, the new IOL design is simple and easy to implant and effectively prevents the temporal negative dysphotopsia, which has been a challenge from quite some time, and we don't have anything to do about it. The present IOL we use in our day-to-day life was designed to replace aphakic glasses, but our radial lens is designed to replace normal crystalline lens, giving capsular bag normal crystalline lens profile, and so the visual experience is devoid of all the dysphotopsias. And this can be the future lens design. These are my references, and thank you.
So Venkat, that was an innovative idea.
Yes,
But your volume, the number of cases did was something like 36. Was it like that? Number of cases you did?
56, sir.
56. So was there any other problems like because we have closed in on the gap between the iris and the lens. So does it produce any iris changes in the long run?
No, sir. That was our
follow-
primary
follow-
problem.
Hmm.
Sir, yes, sir.
Yes.
We
Tell me.
did look for all those things, any
Hmm.
chances of depigmentation and
Yes.
pigmentation depositing on the IOL lens, but none of them has happened. That is the reason we chose the hydrophilic material, sir. If we had chosen for hydrophobic, definitely would have caused depigmentation and all. And but the thing is, the iris rubs over the capsular bag, so there is no problem till now.
Doctor, we thought the iris, the lens vaulting and pressing on the PC helped prevention of a PCO. We
Yes,
thought
yes.
like that, and that was the original design. The vault was designed so that the lens optic exactly goes and presses on the PC. Now you are doing vice versa.
Yes.
So, is there any experience of what is your longest follow up now for the first
Two-
patient?
2
And
years.
do you see PCO in your cases?
Yes, sir. We have seen 5 patients, which is like normal incidents. And actually, there was a Japanese school of thought where they say, like, if you keep the anterior capsule and posterior capsule apart, the chance of PCO will be very less. And that is what happens in this particular lens. And even those 5 cases, they are very minimal, sir. We did ACAP in one case, and we even had a fear that lens will collapse once we do ACAP, but it didn't happen. The lens is already fibrosed and it was just staying like that.
All right. So,
So
with due
PCOS
respect, may I request our judges to invite the next paper speaker,
Yes.
please?
Yes. So thank you, Venkat.
Thank you.
Ashwini, are you connected? Next speaker, Ashwini, is she connected? So if she is not ready, we will call the next speaker, Dr. Pooja Kamar.
Yes,
Pooja,
I'm here.
Pooja, yes. Okay, Pooja. You can start your presentation.
A very good morning to all. At the outset, I have no financial interest in pertaining to this study. We have a lot of topography-based indices, biomechanical-based indices, and OCT-based indices to differentiate between normal and suspect keratoconus eyes. However, if we see this 2 set of patients, the first set of patients has all indices within normal limits, and the second set of patients has suspicious topography. We did a PRK surgery for this patient, and to our surprise, we saw that after 7 years, the patient with all the normal indices developed ectasia, whereas the patient with suspicious indices was still normal. Also, we come across these cases where every, a topography is absolutely normal, but however, within 1 year, the patient develops and goes into an aggressive keratoconic case, and there is aggressive progression. So we need to see what are we missing. It's like our 6 blind men and an elephant, that we are looking at just one indices at a time, but we need to combine all of them. So we need a particular indices which can help us in diagnosing this collagen fibrils, which are basically provides the biomechanical prerequisites necessary to sustain the shape and provide strength to the cornea. But how do we study this? Is there a way to study the collagen fibril orientation and distribution in our eye at this point of time? There are a few technologies like scanning laser polarimetry, which is used in GDX for glaucoma, which can help us in studying this. But the challenge here is that it has imaging artifacts in the eye. So it is very important for us to choose the right principle. The second principle which is available is the polarization sensitive OCT. What happens here is that the polarized light is thrown on the cornea. All the structures of the cornea take up this polarized light and it shows the bifringence. But only the stroma doesn't take this bifringence into consideration, and it shows us in a retardation phase. So we take the advantage of this bifringence property to study how the collagen orientation is in our stroma. Also, the polarized PSOCT has a conical beam which goes towards the entire cornea and it covers the, whereas the conventional OCTs are perpendicular and it covers a small part of the cornea, which will not help us studying the entire collagen properties. So using this, we collaborated with the University of Vienna to build our own custom based polarization sensitive OCT, which will help us in studying the bifringence properties of the collagen. This is a slide which shows how theoretically your collagen should be oriented in the eye and how tightly and all it should be adhered. And these are what the images we get from our polarization sensitive OCT. Just to simplify, the more the blue you see, that is more denser and more tightly the collagens are attached. And the lighter the blue is, or it is towards the yellow or the red side, it means the collagen properties are on the weaker side. So we take this advantage into studying our normal, suspicious keratoconic eyes and the keratoconic eyes. And also we study the LASIK, SMILE, and PRK outcomes of this of when the patients undergo surgeries using custom-based polarization sensitive OCT with a strict exclusion and inclusion criteria. What we found was very interesting that yes, the normal eyes had definitely got a normal orientation of collagen and arrangement, whereas FFKC and keratoconus showed partial and complete loss of orientation of arrangement and collagen. We further, how do we apply this optics into clinic? Let's take similar two examples. Both topographies are normal, but one has suspicious indices and one has normal indices. So theoretically, this should have a weaker collagen. But when we did PSOCT, we found that the patients with suspicious indices had a normal collagen orientation and arrangement, but the patients with normal indices had complete loss of orientation and collagen. So this tells us that if we go ahead and do a surgery, then the first patient will have a favorable outcomes in spite of having suspicious indices, but the second set of patients will have unfavorable outcomes. Also, we see in our clinic that these are a set of patients with different indices. When we did a polarization sensitive OCT, we found that these three patients had weaker collagen to begin with when their indices were normal. So it helps us in customizing the treatment in our clinic. For this patient, either we'll do a PRK extra procedure, which is the accelerated cross-linking procedure, or we'll do a phakic IOL to have optimal outcomes. Also, going further and studying how the collagen orientation is post-surgery, these are the pre-op patients. This is post-LASIK, post-SMILE, post-PRK. You can see that post-LASIK, there is definitely a little bit of loss of collagen orientation and arrangement. But the SMILE and PRK patients, post-operatively also, they maintain the collagen structure and orientation, suggesting that which type of surgery would be, it helps us basically in deciding that which type of surgery would be the best for our patients. The way forward is we are right now working on developing indices like our topographic and biomechanical indices, like how we get values. We are also working on retinal imaging and glaucoma imaging, just like our GDX property. And we are trying to collaborate with the industry to have this PSOCT commercialized in our study. So this is the first polarization sensitive OCT in the country to study the collagen orientation and arrangement. It helps us differentiating the suspicious corneas from healthy corneas, revealing a unique distribution of collagen. The fibrils are most strongly in normal, followed by suspect, followed by keratoconic eyes. And it can become a definite integral part of screening of preoperative workup in our refractive surgery patients and in our keratoconic eyes as well. Thank you.
Dr. Pooja, I have one question for you.
Yes,
How much did it cost you to customize your OCT to make it polarization sensitive?
Ma'am, as this is the first machine and it is a custom built OCT, it cost us several 10 to 15 lakhs. But when we collaborate with industries, that will definitely be at a lower cost. Also, we can plan that this can be incorporated with our conventional OCTs, ASOCTs, which are present. So the cost will be further reduced.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
And I agree that it is a useful tool.
It has multiple applications, and with one tool, you can image both anterior and posterior segment.
Right. Thank you.
And why did the LASIK patient show weakening and the PRK patient doesn't?
Ma'am, sir, in LASIK patient, we are creating a cut of around 20 millimeters on the cornea by creating a flap. So basically, probably because of the flap cutting, there is weakening of the collagen in the periphery. Whereas in PRK, we are not cutting anything, we are just burning the surface. So that is why it is causing a subclinical scarring, which we don't see, but it is maintaining the strength of the cornea in that way.
And that weakening, you're meaning cross-linking is going, or the collagen itself is weakening biochemically?
Collagen, sir. Collagen is weakening biochemically.
Right. Thank you to our judges. Can we move for the next?
Thank you, Ashwini. Then we will move on to the next speaker, Dr. Ramya. Dr. Ramya
Yes,
Cheri.
yes,
Ramya,
there is.
are you here?
Yes, sir, the previous speaker is Dr. Pooja, not Ashwini.
Yes. But is Dr. Ashwini there?
Yeah,
ma'am. I have joined. I'm here.
we need to invite Dr. Ashwini then in that case.
Okay.
I'm Dr. Ashwini. Good morning, all. I'm here.
1 minute, I'll close.
Ashwini.
Share your screen and start, doctor.
I'm Dr. Ashwini. I'll be sharing my screen now.
Yes.
Hey everyone, I'm Dr. Ashwini and I'll be presenting to you a novel discovery of influence of corneal white-to-white diameter in topographical interpretation. As we all know, the corneal diameter changes from infancy and reaches the adult size by 2 years of age. And the corneal white-to-white diameter is the distance between the borders of the corneal nimbus, and it measures around 11 to 12.5 mm and has diverse applications, some of which is including diagnosis of microcornea, megalocornea, and management of congenital glaucoma. And also it helps in ascertaining the size of certain types of intraocular lenses and also in IOL calculation during cataract surgery. So there are different techniques of measuring the corneal white-to-white diameter, and various studies have checked the accuracy of these techniques. However, there have been no studies that have evaluated the relationship between the white-to-white diameter and other indices like K readings obtained from Pentacam. So why did we do this study? We had noticed that some of the children had steeper corneas but no evidence of ectasia, and also some children with microcornea had steeper corneas. So was there any other factor which could be associated with steeper cornea, and hence we went ahead and studied the relationship between corneal white-to-white diameter and also corneal tomography in children. It was a retrospective study which included 683 eyes of children aged between 5 to 17 years of age, and the white-to-white diameter was measured in the horizontal meridian, vertical meridian, and it was done manually by 2 surgeons from the Pentacam Scheimpflug image. So these horizontal and vertical white-to-white diameters were correlated with Pentacam keratometry indices like the flat K, steep K, and Kmax. So as I said, we included children between 5 to 17 years of age, and we excluded children with corneal pathologies like keratoconus, keratoglobus, microcornea, megalocornea, and any corneal scarring, children with allergic eye disease, or any other associated ocular pathology. A multiple regression analysis was done to study the correlation between the indices, and a p-value of less than 0.05 was considered statistically significant. Let's look into the results. So out of the 683 eyes, the mean manifest spherical equivalent was minus 2.83. The mean corneal thickness was 544 microns. The mean Kmax was 45.12, and the mean Pentacam corneal diameter was 11.85 millimeters. At 95% confidence interval, the intraclass correlation coefficient for the horizontal and vertical white-to-white diameters was 0.99 and 0.96 respectively, indicating a good agreement between the surgeons. However, the Pentacam reported horizontal corneal white-to-white diameter showed a relatively poor ICC of 0.76 with horizontal white-to-white diameter. When we look into the regression analysis, horizontal and vertical white-to-white diameter correlated significantly with the flat K, steep K, and the Kmax. However, it was inversely related, which means that whenever there was a decrease in white-to-white diameter by 0.25, there was an increase in the K value by 0.34 diopters. So these are the multiple regression equations which describes the significant relationship between the white-to-white diameters. As we can see, the Kmax for horizontal and vertical white-to-white diameter, the R value is around 0.37 and 0.24, and K1, similarly for K1 it was 0.38 and 0.22, and for K2 it was around 0.48 and 0.22, suggesting a positive correlation. So let's look into an example. For a horizontal white-to-white diameter of 12.2 mm, the K value that we got, K2 value that we got was around 44.19 diopter. So when we reduce the horizontal white-to-white diameter to 11 mm, you can see that the cornea becomes steeper. So you see for the K2 value is 45.56 diopters. So what we already know is that white-to-white diameter aids in diagnosing certain ocular conditions, and the ability of different methods to measure it accurately has already been established. This study adds the correlation between the corneal white-to-white diameter and the Pentacam keratometry indices, and it said that the two are related inversely. So it suggesting that not all steep corneas are ectatic, and the white-to-white diameter has to be taken into consideration. To conclude, white-to-white diameter could be a significant factor in tomographical assessment of cornea, and this was the first novel attempt to link the keratometry indices with the white-to-white diameter. And as I said, they are inversely related, and hence understanding of white-to-white could be critical in tomographical interpretation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashwini. Any questions for her?
I think, as you told, this is a very a novel study. Like I think the topic she has mentioned, I don't think we have heard a lot about it. We might have thought about it, but not heard a lot about it. So and that's a good thing. Probably more data will come in as time passes, and there is a good novel study. Okay. Thank you.
Thanks.
Any co-chair persons? Any questions to Jyoti?
No, sir. This is Ashwini.
Okay.
Ashwini.
Can we go?
Ashwini.
Yeah, we can.
I
go
just
to
wanted to ask whether that negative correlation between is persistent, or is there any case which you had in your study which had another relationship where the Y2Y and the K reading were comparable, like same way?
I didn't get you, sir.
We understand that the K value and the Y2Y are inversely proportional.
Yes,
Is
sir.
it true in all the cases of your study?
Yeah, in all the 683 eyes that we saw, it was inversely related.
All cases.
Yes.
And between the eyes of a same patient, is the fraction the same? The amount of K reading change and the comparable to the Y2Y change? Was it comparable between the eyes of the same patient always? Was it persistent, that relationship?
So I actually, in this study, we've only picked one eye of the child. We've not measured compared it in both the eyes. So as of now, we just wanted to establish a relationship between the K reading and the Y2Y diameter. So we picked only one eye of the child. We've not done it in the other eye. We've not studied the relationship in the other eye.
Okay.
Thank you, Ashwini. Ashwini, I think Ramya is ready. Ramya is ready. So over to you, Ramya.
Yes, sir. Can you see the slide, sir?
Yeah, your voice.
Yes.
My
we can
slide
see a
is
slide.
visible.
Yes, your slide is
Okay.
visible.
My paper is on optical coherence tomography angiography as a prognostic tool in anisometropic amblyopia. We have no financial disclosures. Amblyopia or lazy eye is one of the most common causes of reduced vision in children as well as adults. It's a condition of unilateral or bilateral decrease of visual functions caused by form deprivation and or abnormal binocular interactions that can be explained by a disorder of ocular media or visual pathway itself. Anisometropic amblyopia refers to unilateral amblyopia caused by a distinct refractive error of each eye. Optical coherence tomography has been vastly studied in amblyopia in terms of thickness of macula, fovea, and retinal nerve fiber layer, but there is no consistent in the results. As we know, gold standard of amblyopia treatment is patching. Though macular thickness and foveal thickness was found to be more in anisometropic amblyopes and found to have shown a decline in the thickness following occlusion therapy, but there is no consistency in the results in the RNFL thickness. So why OCTA? It's a novel non-invasive imaging tool which does not use the injection of dye and assesses the vascular flow in a short period of time. It stratifies the retina into 4 layers. It quantifies the foveal avascular zone and vessel density. Keeping this in mind, our aim was to analyze the vascular pattern at the macula in anisometropic amblyopia and to find out the association of vascular changes at the macula with improvement in vision following treatment, that is patching. So we framed our research question: can OCTA parameters be taken as a prognostic tool for improvement in vision in anisometropic amblyopia? This is a cross-sectional study design done in 37 eyes of children less than 18 years of age from 2011 to 16 at Narayan Nethralaya, Bangalore. We have excluded children with a previous history of spectacle wear or patching, more than 6 diopter sphere and more than 3 diopter cylinder, constant squint nystagmus keratoconus, history of eye surgery, corneal scar, neurological and developmental issues, poor compliance for OCTA imaging, non-compliance with the glasses and patching, and poor quality images. We took a detailed history, vision examination according to age-appropriate charts, orthoptic evaluation, anterior posterior segment evaluation, and cycloplegic refraction. OCTA ratio analysis algorithm is a novel algorithm which is attached to the OCT machine, Sweptosource OCT machine, which detects the blood flow, even low blood flow, with a good level of accuracy. So this machine divides the retina into 4 layers: superficial capillary plexus, deep capillary plexus, outer retina, and choriocapillaris. This process is known as segmentation. The superficial capillary plexus is a centripetal arrangement of vascular plexus around the foveal avascular zone. It starts from 3 microns from the internal limiting membrane to 15 microns from the internal plexiform layer. The DCP is a closed network of vascular plexus which starts from 15 microns from the internal plexiform layer to 70 microns from the internal plexiform layer. The outer retina doesn't have much of vascular plexus. It starts from 30 microns from the internal 17 microns from the internal plexiform layer to 30 microns from the retinal pigment epithelium. And the outer retina, the choriocapillary, it has a patchy network of vessels, and it starts from 30 microns from RPE to 60 microns from RPE. So coming to our results, the parameters which showed significant difference between the improved and unimproved eyes were sectoral and large vessel spacing in the deep layer and the total vessel density in the deep layer. These are the vessel parameters in the hypermetropic, meridional, and myopic anisometropic amblyos, but they didn't show any significant association between these three groups. These are the OCTA images. Here, the warmer color indicates increased vessel density, and the cooler colors indicate decreased vessel density. So you can see only in the deep layer improved cases, there is the red is more, indicates increased vessel density in that layer. Whereas all the other 3 images, the cooler color is more. This is the total vessel density in the improved and unimproved stage, showing a significant association. These are the total vessel spacing and the sectoral vessel, large vessel spacing in the improved and non-improved eyes, showing a statistically significant association. So it's known that OCT parameters was previously analyzed in anisometropic amblyos, but the results are not consistent. And only one study analyzed OCTA following occlusion therapy in amblyos, which showed a significant difference in the vessel density in superficial capillary plexus, but not in the DCP. But our study, it shows reduced vessel density in the deep capillary plexus as in previous studies. The vessel density and vessel spacing in the DCP in amblyopic eyes showed a statistically significant difference in children who improved following occlusion therapy. So OCTA parameters could be taken as a prognostic factor in anisometropic amblyopia. But in future, longitudinal studies with larger sample size to look for the correlation between OCTA parameters with amblyopia treatment would be required. Thank you.
Do we have any questions for the presenter, please?
I have just one thing to say to Dr. Ramya.
Yes, ma'am.
This is an interesting study, but tell me how useful would it be in day-to-day practice for strabismologists or those who are treating amblyopia?
Yeah, that's what, ma'am. So if we do OCTA, this is a non-invasive technique. So if we do OCTA and if we are seeing an association, means the deep vessel capillary plexus is more, we can tell the parents that this child is has more chance of getting amblyopia improved compared to the children with a low vessel density.
That you could tell even by vision improvement,
So that it can be taken as a
simple vision improvement. If a child,
no, ma'am, if a child
with amblyopia is improving, say after 1 month of patching, it indicates that the prognosis is good. The chances of his improvement are good. This is so simple. Why do we need a sophisticated tool for this? It's okay as a research question,
but
as a research modality, fine. But how useful is it going to be in day-to-day practice?
Yeah, but all children with reduced visual acuity may not improve even following amblyopia treatment. So if we could see an association with these parameters is showing more improvement, we can tell them that this child is more chance of getting improved.
Okay, anyway, fine.
I think I'll rephrase your point, doctor. I think both children will improve with occlusion therapy. Probably your subgroup will improve a line more.
That's true.
Not like
yes,
the
sir.
other group will not improve. So in that way, what madam says is very relevant. Why you bring a huge investigation into the arm and doing OCTA in children is not going to be easy, especially in amblyopic children. OCTA especially prefers perfect fixation and perfect centering of the OCT for a sequential cuts. And that might not be able to do in a amblyopic child. So
In
all these are parameters. Anyway,
The
interesting study.
costing,
Thank you.
the
Okay.
cost also will go up. Cost of
Good.
treatment also will go up.
Can we now invite our next presenter?
So
please?
thank you, Ramya. We'll move on to next speaker, Dr. Debasmita Jaina.
Yes.
Debasmita, are you ready? Okay, you can start, Debasmita. You can start sharing your screen.
A very good morning, everyone, respected panelists. And today I'm going to present about the myopic SIP due to the increased screen time during this lockdown due to the COVID pandemic in the 2020. And I have no financial interest. So in December 2019, a novel coronavirus rapidly spread in China and all over the world. In response to the COVID, the government of different countries, including India, started nationwide lockdown to prevent spreading of the infection. So now there is increased use of digital platform for education, to job and to recreation amongst all the age group of the people. And myopia is a major visual defect issue around the world. The WHO estimates that half of the population of the world may be myopic by 2050. And in recent years, less time spent in the outdoor activities and increased duration and intensity of the near work have been recognized to be associated with myopia. So in this study, our aim was to investigate the increased screen time during the lockdown 2020 is associated with some myopic shift. So my materials and methods, it is a prospective observational type of study. So the number of patients included was 189 and the study period was 3 months only, May, June and July of the year 2020, and the place was Rio SCVMCH, and the age group of the patient included in the study was 12 to 35 years. So the patient who presented with the chief complaints of like defective vision or the decreased vision with the current glasses using asthenopia, headache and lacrimation are included in the study. So these patients were then subjected to visual acuity test, then slit lamp examination, autorefractometry, and then trial of the glasses. So visual acuity was tested using Sneller's chart, both without the glasses and with glasses who were previously using it. And the slit lamp examination was performed on all patients to rule out the other causes of diminution of vision, like any corneal diseases like dystrophy or any causes of lacrimation like dry eye diseases or anything. And autorefractometry was then done, and after that trial of glasses was done for all the patients. The astigmatic patients were excluded from the study, and the BCB of every patient was recorded. So this is the male is to female ratio. Male was 57% and 43% were female. And this table of showing the age distribution of patient, mostly we are the most number of patients we can see it is the age group of 20 to 23 age group, and up to school, and after that the school children like 12 to 15 years of age. So and previously myopic were there are 45 patients were previously myopic, and previously non-myopic were 144 patients. And this table was showing the increase in the diopteric power in non-myopes and in the myopes. There is, we have taken up to -1 diopter, so up to -0.25 diopter in non-myopes, the number of patients are 48, up to -0.50, that is 32, up to -0.75, that is 37, and -1 is 27 patients. And in previously myopic patients, similarly, increase in -0.25 diopter was seen in 17 patients, and -0.50 diopter was seen in 21, and -0.7 in 7 patients. So the average increase in the screen time was 3.16 to ±1.44 hours per day. And the increase in screen time was for purpose of online classes amongst the school and college people, for work from home amongst the job holders, and for entertainment purposes, and other for all of the cases. So the 144 patients, like 76.2% who were previously e-metropic, showed myopia of range -0.5 to -1 diopter, and 45 patients who were previously myopic showed increase in myopia by -0.25 to -0.75 diopter. So coming to discussion, so the result of the above study demonstrate a positive correlation between the increased screen time and myopic shift, but the combined effect of near work, including computer use, reading time, and reading distance, increases the odds of myopia. So the symptoms patients presented with were mostly eye strain, lacrimation, and blurring vision. So issues with accommodation had also emerged with increased visual screen display terminal uses due to the slowing of the focus change in computer or any digital display screen uses. So the myopic shift was found to be minus 0.25 to minus 0.75 diopter among the previously myopic patients and minus 0.25 to minus 1 diopter amongst the non-myopic patients. While the direct links between screen time and prolonged permanent myopia have not been found, but the possibility that it exists is still prevalent. A meta-analysis spanning 12 cohort studies and 15 cross-sectional studies have and including 25,025 children among 6 to 18 years of age concluded that there was an evidence rating of only recommending a reduction in time speed with the reading to reduce the risk of myopia. And our studies has its flaws, like less number of subjects we had taken, and also these patients were not followed up later. So conclusion being, while the literature is largely inconclusive when it comes to determining whether or not increased screen time has a causative link to myopia progression over time, but there have been studies that suggest a possible link between these two. The involvement of near work activity and the decreased time spent outside seem to have a possible correlations with increased amount of refractive error. And all the government should implement guidelines for the online platform users for schools and colleges to prevent further myopia. And these are my references. Thank you.
Thank you, doctor. Any questions for her, please?
Yes, very nice study and very much needed at the present time, because we are still going through the pandemic. And I think this is very important because all of us saw a lot of myopic increase in our patients. So I like the idea. Good job.
So only thing problem is we do not know whether the subjects were included in this. Even without this, whether they would be having an increase in myopia for the previous myopes, or even otherwise those who are prone for myopia, would they have gone in? So that needs something, because this naturally COVID days and screen time, we know that increased screen time, increased near vision increases chance of myopia. So that's all well in literature. But here in this context, it is good that studies are being done, but we need a very long follow-up, and the other ancillary factors also need to be taken in to say that this is this. That's all. Okay. Thank you.
Also, whether
Yes,
we deprive the person of screen time, whether the myopia will reverse. That was what I was thinking.
Long follow-up is required.
1 or 2 months of deprival should also be studied from screen time and what happens.
Deprival would be most difficult to achieve.
Absolutely. About to say that, Meeta. About to say that. How will you deprive them now?
All right.
So, over to the next speaker is Dr. Prashasti Gupta. Prashasti, are you there?
Yes, sir. Good morning, sir.
Yes. Yes.
Just before you start, Prashasti, I may remind the judges that she's a non-ratified member.
Yes. So that's already given in the scoring sheet.
Yes. Go ahead, Prashasti.
Screen visible, sir?
Yes.
Make it full screen.
Make it full
Yes.
screen.
Very good morning to the respected team. My topic is an exploratory study of a novel application on a PC software to evaluate the color contrast sensitivity. The aims and objectives of my study were to use an Adobe PC software to design a new test to determine the color contrast sensitivity and to standardize and study the range of color contrast sensitivities for the three basic colors, red, green, and blue, in subjects of varying ages, genders, refractive states, and eyes with and without intraocular lenses. The materials and methods: we did a prospective case series on 150 subjects, including both the eyes, who were cooperative and consented for the test, age being more than 5 years, the best corrected vision of 6/9 or even better, and had the normal pupillary reactions. The study was conducted on Adobe Photoshop version 7 on an Apple MacBook Pro, which had the advantage of providing the retinal display. The test was standardized for 3 basic colors, red, green, and blue. The testing distance was set at 1 meters. For each of the RGB colors, the software allowed for the color brightness alterations in percentages and the preset values of color units varying from a minimum of value 0 to maximum of 255. The background value was set at 255 color units and the foreground values were reduced to 240 color units stepwise. The greater the foreground background difference, greater was the contrast. This is the software image where we could see the RGB colors being set minimum at 240 and maximum at 255. Saturation was set at 100% for all the 3 colors and brightness ranged from 94% to 100%. And this is a hue which according to a representation on color wheel has specified values of 0 degrees for red, 120 degrees for green and 240 for blue. On a slide, 6 letters were presented in 2 rows, the font size having 49 millimeters, which is according to standard Pelly-Robson chart. If patient was able to read 4 out of 6 letters, it was considered a good response. At first, we decreased the letters color units in order to make them appear darker till the subject could read more than 4 letters. And then the process was reversed, making the letters lighter to compare for the effects. The difference in color unit as a proportion of maximum background color unit was the threshold for that color and its inverse represented the sensitivity. The maximum and minimum contrast sensitivity as we calculated were 256 for the maximum and 17 units as a minimum. These were the images. As for blue color, this is a slide which is showing the maximum threshold and thus the minimum sensitivity. And this is with the minimum threshold and the maximum sensitivity. Similar were for the green and the red colors. The results is obtained on study conducted with 86 males and 64 females and 45 pseudophakic patients with 18 having IOL in one eye and 27 in both the eyes. On comparison with age, we could see that there is a decline in the contrast sensitivity with increase in age and the test was significant with p-value of less than 0.001. On comparison amongst the colors, there was a strong positive correlation since one being affected, the other will also have the same effect. And in the myopes we did study, although the number was less and the power taken was up to 5 diopters, a significant but very minimal positive correlation was observed. On comparison with the patients with IOL and without IOL, a better performance was seen in the eyes which were having no surgery done, that is non-pseudophakic, in comparison to the eyes which were pseudophakic. However, no association was detected with the hyperopic patients and neither any difference was noted between the 2 genders. Thus, we could conclude that we have demonstrated the possibility of using this PC-based software to assess the contrast sensitivity in normal subjects as well as in those with IOL. And in future, we can explore this to assess the ability of people who need to function in poor contrast environments like the nature photography at night or action against the enemies in darkness. And there is a very easy availability of this PC software. So we can validate the use of this test to find a use in our clinical workup of patients. Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor. Judges, questions for her, please.
I like the use of this software. It's an innovative thing and very easy. So very good idea.
Thank you.
I think you should work on this further and validate it and bring it in the market.
Absolutely. Patent it.
Yes.
Can we go to the next?
Yes, we'll move on to the next speaker, madam. So, the okay, Prashant. The next one is Dr. Garima Rai. Garima, are you there?
Dr. Garima, are you present? If not, sir, then we can go to the next.
Yes. Well,
Sumita Muthu.
Sumita Muthu. Sumita, are you present? Sumita?
Yes, I am present.
Okay.
Yes. Start.
One second, sir. I'm just sharing my screen.
Relax and cool down.
Yes.
Okay.
Take a minute There's no
Sure.
hurry.
Thank you, ma'am.
She's very cool, madam. She's very cool.
Make it full screen.
Good morning, dear judges. I'm going to present my paper today on what are the etiological associates of refractive abnormality other than axial length. So if you look at myopia, there's a close relation of scleral rigidity and an important role of scleral biomechanical remodeling in progression of myopia. And corneal biomechanics are closely related to scleral biomechanics. So we studied the assessment of corneal and extraocular tissue stiffness using air puff applanation. This was done using Corvus ST, and we looked at the extraocular deformation or extraocular stiffening parameters with respect to age. What we found was that extraocular tissue was found to be stiffening was found to be increasing with age, and corneal deformation or corneal stiffness was unaffected by age. So this is how we studied. This is how we derived our biomechanical model. We looked at, my video is not playing, sorry. Okay, so what happens is when the air puff strikes the surface of the cornea, there's an applanation of the corneal surface and it slowly returns back to its original state. So when we take only the first 18 seconds, what happens is the cornea goes from the position of T1 to T2 and then returns to a new position called T3. So if you look at this, so what happens is when the cornea returns, if you look at only the apex, it goes from T1 to T2 and then returns to T3. But if you look at the corneal edge, there's also a movement of corneal edge which represents the whole eye movement. So if you subtract this whole eye movement from the Corvus deformation amplitude, what
Dr. Sumita?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Some connectivity issues. Okay, continue.
Yes, she's back.
Sorry, should I go back to the previous slide? Sir?
No, you can continue. Sir.
Okay,
I
so
think
this
it is only a minimal break. You can continue.
Okay. Sure, sir. So this is a biomechanical model, which is an analytical mathematical model. And using this, we could segregate the corneal stiffness, extraocular tissue stiffness, and the extraocular tissue viscosity. So we studied the corneal biomechanical stiffness with respect to refractive error in the pediatric population. We included almost 733 pediatric eyes. And what we found was that corneal stiffness reduces with higher grade of myopia and extraocular stiffness increases with higher grade of myopia. So of course, we established the association with myopia, but can we predict myopia using these parameters? So to study the predictive association of tomographical and biomechanical indices with subjective refractive error using artificial intelligence was our aim. We also tried to look at what can be a most direct marker of myopia apart from axial length. So we included 1,500 eyes in this age group and we divided them into the following groups based on the spherical equivalent. And based on the indices, the corneal biomechanical indices which were obtained from Corvus ST,
There is some connectivity issue, I think.
predictive capacity of these.
Yeah, connectivity issue at Dr. Sumita's end.
Continue.
But ma'am, you can continue, please, as in when you are connected.
Okay, sir, sure. So we basically try to look at all these corneal biomechanical indices from Corvus and corneal tomographical indices from Pentacam. So overall about 88 indices and looked at their prediction value. So all these indices were again combined using AI software. And again, we looked at the predictive capability of this using area under the curve and classification accuracy values. So AUC higher means the predictive capability is better. So overall distribution among the results were as follows with respect to low myopes, moderate myopes, emetropes, and high myopes. And these were the best Corvus indices which could predict the refractive error. And these were the best Pentacam indices which could predict the refractive error. And when we looked at the correlation, this is the actual refractive error.
We're losing connectivity again and again.
I think we've lost her.
No, she's back. Are you back? Yeah, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead. Sumita.
Okay. So this was a correlation with respect to actual refractive error and the predicted refractive error. So actual refractive error was 40.9%, and for emmetropes, for low myopes, it was 69.5%. For moderate myopes, it was 28%. And for the area under the curve was 0.71 for Corvis. And if you look at Pentacam, this is how it was: 58%, 65%, 20.9%, and 5% for high myopes. So area under the curve was again 0.71. So if you look at the results, when we combined both the Corvis and Pentacam values, the correlation was much better. This is the actual refractive error and this is the predicted refractive error. You can see that it is increasing to 69% with respect to emmetropes. With respect to low myopes, it's 60%, moderate myopes 38%, and with high myopes 35.9%. And area under the curve was also higher now, and it is 0.75. So to conclude, this study is the first attempt to associate the tomographical and biomechanical indices to myopia, and biomechanical indices could be an additive factor in predicting pediatric myopia, and biomechanical indices could also help in predicting tracking myopia progression. And this is a novel technique that can change the interface of myopia diagnosis. So what we already knew is that corneal stiffness decreases with myopic severity, and tomographical parameters also change significantly with myopic severity. But what our study adds is that biomechanical and tomographical parameters showed high predictability of myopic severity, which became even higher when both the parameters were combined. So these parameters have the potential to predict myopia. And this may explain why children with myopia with several environmental and lifestyle risk factors progress at different rates. So this was the limitation of our study, that the distribution was not equal among all age groups. And in future, this may have an important role in the epidemic of myopia, that it may predict the myopic progression. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Sumita.
Thank you, ma'am.
Any questions for her?
So like she has said, no, myopia, actually it's becoming an epidemic. As one of these previous speakers told, by 2050, all over the world, and now at least it's more in the Oriental countries. India is also picking up. So I think a lot of studies on the myopia, and other than the conventional axial length, things like that, no. So more on corneal biomechanics and tomography, they are yet to come up. And that's one of the studies that we heard now. That is a good thing, Sunita. So any questions to Sunita?
No, I think we can go to the next speaker.
Okay, madam. That is Ayushi Chowdhury.
Is Dr. Garima Rai present? Because then if she is, we need to call her first. Garima? I don't think she's present. Anyway.
So, Ayushi, are you there? Dr. Ayushi Chowdhury.
Ayushi Chowdhury?
Yes, sir.
Start present.
Good morning, ma'am. Good morning, sir. I'm going to be talking about relationship between stereoacuity and the degree of myopia.
Ayushi, please speak up.
Yeah, Dr. Ayushi, you are not audible that loud. So if you can do some adjustments, please.
Yes, sir. Stereopsis is the ability to provide a three-dimensional image.
No, Ayushi, you need to increase the volume on your laptop or do something. It's still not very audible.
Doctor, are you using
closer to the mic?
You're using an earphone or something?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Could you try taking out that earphone, unplug that and just speak?
Yeah, try that. Just speak directly into the laptop, into your laptop mic. That might help.
Yeah, Dr. Ayushi, can you say something?
Ayushi, did you get that point? What was told?
Okay, go to full screen again and start speaking. Then we'll come to know whether your volume has increased or not. Speak. No, we can't hear you at all.
Ma'am, am I audible now?
Yes.
Fantastic, loud and clear.
Go ahead now. Go ahead.
Yes,
Make
sir.
Full screen. Your slides are not full screen.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, perfect. Start speaking.
I'm just a moment.
Go back. You can go back to your first slide. Share screen again
Yes, ma'am.
and take it easy.
Can we restart her time, the timer, please?
Yes, please.
We'll give a restart of the timer, please. Dr. Ayushi, relax. Please go ahead. Not to
Yes.
worry.
Yes.
Yes, sir. So can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
See your screen and start from the beginning.
Yes, sir.
Go
Good
to the
morning.
full screen.
Full screen.
Yes.
You're not going to full
No,
screen.
go to this option where you have
Yes.
start slideshow from beginning. Yes,
It's okay.
perfect.
It's okay now.
Done, go.
Go ahead.
Stereopsis is the ability to provide a three-dimensional image of a structure by fusing two slightly dissimilar images. Since the eyes are laterally placed, two dissimilar images are presented on the retina, and these give rise to a depth perception. The normal stereo acuity is 60 seconds of arc, which is reached by 5 years of the age, and a decrease in stereopsis affects our fine visual motor and spatial functions. All states of ametropia have an adverse effect on stereopsis as they reduce the binocular fusion by creating a visual blur. It's a leading cause of diminution of vision in both the developed and developing countries.
Your volume is increasing and decreasing. There is some issue.
Myopia, anisometropia, and anisoconia decrease the binocular fusion, which in turn leads to a decrease in stereopsis.
Don't use your earphone.
Oh, ma'am, I'm sorry, it's connecting.
And you're not even full screen. Your full screen is going back to. Just relax and do it. Don't get upset. You will be able to do it. Aren't you? Are your slides not moving forward? Is there an issue? Can't hear you at all. We can't hear you. Ayushi?
Ayushi, you have some problem with your audio. So,
Do you want some time to settle the issue? If we can ask.
I think we can shift to the next one and then call her again.
I think so, because then she's getting all panicky.
okay, so we'll and so then in that case, no, we have got the next is the keynote.
No, is Dr. Garima
Yeah,
back?
Dr. Garima Rai is left yet.
She's there,
Garima.
but is she present?
Dr. Garima is not to be found here.
Next is Dr. Mir.
So shall we move on to the next one if Ayushi is not ready? So the next is
Yes,
the
sir.
keynote
Keynote
by
address.
keynote.
Yeah.
So
Can we
so
mark
then the session.
Garima as absent. Shall we mark Garima as absent?
Yes,
sir.
madam. We have
Yeah,
called
we
her.
have that.
We have called her repeatedly, and she is not there, and she is not to be seen. So we'll mark her as absent.
Doctor, a small suggestion. Still, since we have a little time with us,
Okay.
we can give a little time to the doctor again.
Okay.
If she can come back with her presentation.
Fine.
Yes.
Fine.
So
fine.
okay.
Till
So
then,
I
we go to the keynote address, I think.
we will not the keynote. So without wasting time, we'll not the keynote. So keynote. So in this session, we have got a keynote by Dr. Mihir. So Mihir Trilok Kothari. Yes, is the AIS Optics Refraction Contact Lens Award paper on dynamic ophthalmoscopy, a novel objective technique to estimation of accommodation in children. So Mihir is already there. So Mihir, over to you.
Good morning, colleagues and students. Thank you very much for the opportunity to talk once again about this novel technique. We have no financial disclosure to be made, and the study was approved by the Institutional Review Board at Mahatma Eye Hospital, Nagpur. It was part of the thesis program of one of our ophthalmology residents. All of us are acutely aware of presbyopic difficulties, and we are used to prescribing bifocals or progressive addition lenses in this adult group of patients. However, it's to be noticed that 80% children having Down syndrome suffer from presbyopia from childhood. 50% children with cerebral visual impairment also have presbyopia. 30% children with foveal hypoplasia associated with albinism or PARC6 gene mutation or aniridia also suffer from accommodative abnormalities. A large number of children with ectopia lentis or amblyopia, strabismus, asthenopia, as well as children on low dose atropine also have dysfunction of their accommodation. So we need to recognize these abnormalities so that appropriate management, which is usually a bifocal prescription, can be given to these children. So methods available for assessment of accommodation have been dynamic aberrometry, autorefractometry, and dynamic retinoscopy, of which dynamic retinoscopy is the only clinical method. Dynamic aberrometry and autorefractometry are not popular because of significant underestimation that it has with assessment of accommodation. Dynamic retinoscopy in India has not become very popular because of little difficulty in terms of scissoring of reflex in presence of astigmatism, as well as inability to perform the test rapid enough and bilaterally simultaneously. In our survey of group of pediatric eye surgeons of Mumbai, we realized out of 22 members having an average experience of 5.8 years in practice, only one pediatric eye surgeon was confident enough with the estimation of accommodation using MEM method of dynamic retinoscopy. Which is relatively simple, can be done on both eyes simultaneously and significantly faster, and works better in patients having large astigmatisms. You just need to look at the patient's red reflex while patient is being asked to look at a distance wearing an optical correction. It could be a dark room or it could be a reduced illuminated room. When the child looks at a distance, you can notice a superior crescent, and as the child starts accommodating, the crescent of the red reflex starts moving, reducing in the upper segment, and starts appearing a new crescent inferiorly that tends to keep becoming bigger in size. So more the accommodation, bigger is the crescent inferiorly. This is a video recording through a direct ophthalmoscope. When the child is looking at distance, there was a superior crescent, as you see over here. And as soon as the child will start looking at an accommodative target at near, an inferior crescent, and as the course is increasing, how quickly it happens, how well, whether it is equal in both eyes or no, and whether it is sustained or no. These 4 parameters can tell us about the quality of accommodation using this test. One more testing that can be added to this is measurement of the magnitude of accommodation. So this test can be converted into a quantitative test by interjecting a neutralizing lens in front of accommodating eye. As you see over here in this 40 centimeter accommodation, it's neutralized at minus 0.5 diopter. And in a 25 centimeter, it's being neutralized with minus 3.5 diopter. The aim of my study was to validate the reliability of this particular test using several methods. We first compared both the methods qualitatively in normal subjects. Then we applied it in 1,000 consecutive patients in pediatric ophthalmology clinic where comorbidities were also detected, followed by its comparison in estimation manner. That means we were measuring the magnitude of loss of accommodation using the 2 techniques in normal subjects. We also had our fellows using the test so that we can check the inter-observer validity. And of course, finally, we validated the scale among pediatric ophthalmology consultants of Mumbai. In the first part of the study, we compared dynamic distance ophthalmoscopy with dynamic retinoscopy. We had to have 32 eyes in an observational, comparative, and masked manner. 2 observers performed DDDO and DR in a separate manner on children who were 5 to 16 years of age visiting a pediatric eye clinic, who were perfectly otherwise normal. So condition. What we found was the sensitivity, specificity, as well as the predictive values were in excess of 90%, 96, 95% was an average, and a very high kappa coefficient between the inter-observer. Followed by this, we applied this technique to qualitatively measure the accommodation and its dysfunction in pediatric ophthalmology clinic. 1,000 children were evaluated in the masked manner, and we found the sensitivity and specificity were very impressive. This was followed by evaluation of magnitude of accommodation using interjection method or with a MEM method of dynamic retinoscopy, in which we had to have 60 patients included. Again, it was an observational comparative. However, it was a non-masked study. The same observer in sequence performed EDDDO first, followed by EDR in the same similar group of children. However, the comparison of response accommodation was done at 40 centimeters, 25 centimeters, 10 centimeters, as well as 8 centimeters. So 60 multiplied by 8 readings were acquired. When compared, we found at 40 centimeter response accommodation using EDDDO as well as EDR was around 3 diopter. At 25 centimeter, it was 5 diopter. At 10 centimeter, the child could exert 9.8, 9.5 diopters. And at 8 centimeter, around 11 or 11.3 diopter. So there was a very minimal overestimation using EDDDO. However, the Pearson correlation was in excess of 0.9. Then we compared the EDDDO with EDR under partial cycloplasia and mydriasis to evaluate the onset of accommodation, the cycloplasia using cycloplegic agent in 12 eyes, 6 children, where again at 4 different distances, the measurements were required, making to around 48 measurements. And we had a mean response accommodation in this particular set of patients, 6.62 and 6.3, again giving 0.3 diopter of extra accommodation with EDDDO. Inter-observer variation between the two techniques was compared in 10 eyes of 10 children. 40 measurements each were obtained by observer 1, masked from observer 2. These were pediatric ophthalmology fellows, and there was a very high correlation coefficient between the two observers. Kappa value was high. Eventually, the test was subjected to survey with the pediatric ophthalmologists, who were provided with this standard photograph. As you see over here, from left panel in the upper part to the lower right panel, there is an increasing amount of accommodation, which was appropriately utilized by the faculty of GPOS. These are 18 pediatric eye surgeons who use this standard photograph to detect abnormal accommodation in children between having an experience of 6 months to 19 years of experience among pediatric eye surgeons. And 16 ophthalmologists could correctly identify accommodative abnormalities using this particular test and the standard photographs. The limitation of either of these two methods, EDDDO or EDR, is interjection of the lens, which itself can induce accommodation and produce falsely higher accommodative values of response accommodation in children. And hence, it is necessary that we do a quick interjection and removal of the lens while we apply this test. In future, studies can be performed using a non-interjection method, using an mobile app such as a GCK app, which is more like a photo screener method of performing the same test. In conclusion, I feel DDDO as well as its modification EDDDO are easy, rapid, objective, having a very good qualitative as well as quantitative assessment of accommodation, and they have very good correlation, inter-observer variation, and they are valid tests to be utilized is routine in pediatric ophthalmology clinic to assess abnormal accommodation in children. And it offers a unique advantage of being able to assess accommodation from both eyes simultaneously. And hence it becomes the only clinical available test to detect anisotropic accommodation in children. Thank you.
Thank you, Mihir. That was wonderful. I think a very easy and a way of finding out accommodation, not using anything which is not available in every clinic. Every clinic has a direct ophthalmoscope practically, and I think great job as usual.
Thank you, ma'am.
So, only thing is you'll
Right,
have to spend some time on just mastering this. That's all.
Judges,
Just to spend some time on mastering this skill. That's all.
Doing this, yeah, right.
Judges, may I request you if we can again request Dr. Ayushi?
Yes,
Yes. Ayushi, if she's ready, Ayushi.
absolutely. Ayushi, start. Ayushi, are you ready?
I've just requested her to unmute her mic.
Okay.
Dr. Ayushi, you there? I think she's still facing some kind of technical issues. Okay, doctors, I would just like to, all the judges, I would just like to remind you, once the session is done, please submit your questionnaire papers and mark sheets. You must definitely have a specified WhatsApp number or an email ID with you. So, doctor, I request you all to please do not forget to submit that.
Sure.
Once again, may I request Dr. Ayushi? We still have 5 more minutes. We really want to go through your papers.
I know. Ayushi, have you managed to sort out your problem? She's not even answering.
On mute, and
She's not answering only.
there is definitely some major issue what she's.
And should you want me to call her? Her number is there. Her phone number is there.
So maybe some network issues would be there. I think someone from the back office can call her and find out.
Yeah. And what do we do about Garima Rai? I think
Garima Rai, doctor, she is not there.
So she's absent.
So
So
finally,
I think you can mark her absent.
Mark her no N. We are supposed to mark Y or N. So I've already marked her N.
So,
And the back office call.
Ayushi, should we be calling her or somebody? If
Because actually
we want our young ophthalmologists to have this platform.
I know.
Yes.
We still
So,
have 5 minutes left. So if she
yeah,
can.
we do have. 5
yes, Ayushi has just joined.
Yeah, she's here.
Come on, Ayushi.
Okay, Dr. Ayushi, what we do is, first of all, you are not audible. Your audio is not audible. So just check your plugins. Let's go step by step. If you have used your earphones or headphones or some kind of stuff, please stop using that. You're already unmuted from our end. So what you do is you go to the mic options, click on the mic, you will find some audio settings. In that you can use computer audio settings, use computer device. Just go to your mic section and just see you have a couple of options there. Maybe that can help you.
Ayushi, please can you start?
I think somebody is helping her out on the phone. She's got a call. Somebody is trying to figure out her technical problems.
Okay. She's on the phone. She's connecting to audio. Yeah.
She still seems to be getting some help. But I think
Yeah,
that
connected to audio. She's connected to audio.
Ayushi, yes.
Could you please say something, Dr. Ayushi?
He's talking, but we can't hear her. Ayushi, we can't hear you.
Dr. Ayushi, on the left side bottom, there is an option of, yeah. Why don't you click on the option? Go to the audio settings.
Can we simply ask her to just play her PowerPoint? At least we'll get the conclusion
Yeah.
out.
Presentation.
Go to the audio options. You see best speaker and high definition device. Just increase the volume from.
You know where there is your mute button, just click on the arrow next to it and then you will find select a microphone, then audio settings.
Just play your presentation, Ayushi. Just go through the presentation. Don't worry about the audio.
Share your screen, right?
So if anybody would like to read out,
She can just run through the slide.
yes, we can run through the slides.
Poor girl.
Dr. Ayushi, do not go fast on your slides.
Let us read it. Next.
Doctor, yes, we can give her a cue to change the slide. Please change your slide. Next slide, please. Next slide, please.
Okay, next slide.
Next.
Next.
Next. Next. Next. Next. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ayushi.
Thank you, Ayushi.
Very sorry about that, but I think there was a real problem at your end. Never mind, it happens.
No problem. So you got many more years to present. So don't feel disheartened. Okay, you are just starting. Okay, so all the best for your next presentation, and which will come without any hitches, because these are the things experience teaches us. No, so this is one experience. So next time we will be more armed. Okay, so best of luck, Ayushi. Okay.
All right. So, doctors, do we have judges? Any closing notes?
So, so I think we had a very good session. So, my thinking was probably the other panelists will also agree. When we talk about think about optics, refraction, and contact lenses, we will think about more of basics. But we have seen that we have seen more of advanced than basics. So, other than the one study on incidence of myopia in COVID times, no, most of the studies were sort of high-tech innovative studies. Good thing, but I think the other things also has to come through. But anyway, it is a very good session. So any comments from any of the co-chairpersons?
I think it was a very nice session and everybody presented very well. And as Sir said, yes, we need some basic studies also. Advanced are good, but everybody is not in a position to be doing those. So, but it's nice to increase our knowledge at least of what can be done with the help of newer machines, newer data. So I'm very happy to be part of this session. Thank you all. And we'll upload our mark sheets on the given one.
I'd like to take this opportunity to thank all our judges. So Dr. Shah Sharanam, Dr. Meeta Joshi, Dr. Rahul Deshpande, Dr. Raj Sekhar, Dr. Sumit Moga, Dr. Sunaina Malik, Dr. Prafulla Kumar, and Dr. Krishna Prasad. I would like to thank all our judges as well as all the speakers who are here to present their papers. All the best, and it was a wonderful presentation.